not every day that a TV series makes you pause and say, wow, this cinematography is different. There is such a glut of amazing cinematography these days, it's tough to stand out. And I felt this recently watching the series Surviving Black Hawk Down. Beautiful, some of the most stunning interviews. But that's not what we're talking about today.
So what is this about?
We're talking about White Lotus. Specifically season 3. This cinematography has stood out, and I often want to just pause it and study the frame. And there are a few different categories of style that I've identified that I want to talk about from this show and talk about how you can also apply it to your own work. Now, full disclosure, this show has made me uncomfortable. I think that's the whole point. I don't condone the content of it. I just never want to kiss my brother.
What?
With that aside, let's talk about what is making this show unique and why everyone is talking about this cinematography. That is also an exaggeration. Why people who have watched this show, who appreciate cinematography or don't even know much about it, still say this looks different. Let's jump in. First unique thing which separates this show from the other 2 seasons is the choice of lenses. From the research that I have done, they shot this on the Sony Venice. I'm not sure if the Sony Venice 2, comment down below and let me know, but they used a set of lenses called the Movie Cam lenses. The Movie Cam lenses are vintage optics. They were created by a company called Movie Cam from Austria, and they're renowned for their distinct visual characterization. They have a tiny bit of that swirly bokeh or a bit of the cat's eye bokeh that happens in the corners. These lenses have become so renowned that Ari Rental, yes, we're talking about Ari. Hey, the squirrel's back. Oh, Kim, the squirrel's here.
Squirrel!
One sec.
Here he is. We got some pistachios. You didn't even know where the door is.
Whoa.
Right out.
Wasn't that special, Kim?
Very special.
As I was saying, recognizing their unique style and appeal, Ari Rental has reintroduced these lenses, combining the classic optical elements with modern high-performance housing. And yes, I mentioned Ari, like the Alexa people. I haven't had the pleasure of shooting on these, but I would like to. They are T 2.0 through the whole set, and there is a lot of lenses in that set all right here. Wow, 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 wow. So with that vintage optics, you often get a little bit of softness, and that's why I've thrown on a heavy mist for this interview to give it that look. When you're seeing these close-up shots of people on the show, especially when they're outdoors, the background blooms slightly, and I don't know what filtration they used. It looks minimal. Sometimes when you add too much filtration, you begin to lose the texture of people's skin. It just kind of blurs it. It's like using the heel brush too much in Photoshop, but they still have kept that. One of the first things that makes this cinematography unique and stand out is the use of extreme shallow depth of field, especially when outside. The cinematographer Ben Cutchins? You can do it! Ben, the cinematographer Ben, really looked to separate the characters from the background, which is kind of shallow depth of field, but at an extreme level. Some people have even said to a distracting moment. I find it kind of interesting because to me, it makes the people feel trapped at this resort. By making the depth of field so shallow, we're not seeing the world outside. There are episodes where they venture outside of the actual location, but when we're at the resort, you'll see how shallow and how closed off the people feel from the external world. Now, you could say this cinematography is maybe cheesy, just feels like someone got a 5D back in the day, full frame, and they were able to shoot super shallow depth of field, so they did it. But I actually think there is reason to this. It's a bit of a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. But it's only the first 5 minutes of the show. You'll see that there is an attack on the actual resort. And then the rest of the show keeps us in this shallow depth of field world whenever we're at the resort, almost making you feel like you want to see what is in the bushes, what is beyond the characters, because you know that there are people, and you never see who it is, that have come to actually attack this resort. So it creates a tension for you. While I'm watching this, I'm always thinking about that very chaotic moment at the beginning. And I've even complained that the pacing of the show is a bit too slow, but I think that's the point. When you start with a bang and then you go back into the past, you have this ominous moment, this disaster that's waiting to happen. Feels like the cinematographer, oh, the squirrel's back, Kim.
Squirrel! Where?
Doink, you look great. Your scar's going down. Enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Gosh, I'm worse than a dog. As I was saying, a few key aspects of the cinematography also is that they love one huge key lighting for the scene. They don't love fill lighting. They barely use backlighting, and unless they're outdoors, implying that sunlight is lighting the scene, they will pour the color onto people's skin. whether it's from artificial sources or by exaggerating the tungsten lighting. They really push the color in the show. And if people are outdoors and they have a normally lit, balanced skin tone, they'll make sure that they're up against a background that is extremely colorful, usually the forest. But I want to come back to that key light. You'll see in most scenes, they won't ever embrace a fill light. And I appreciate this. You can see from my studio, this is how I usually light myself. It's just one big key lighting. I like the look. I find if you get too much into the fill light, it just starts feeling like a news interview. But you'll see them push this to the extreme, like these shots here on the yacht at night. Again, we have one key source coming from the side, no fill light. They don't care to add a backlight that would normally light up her hair. They just let it fall off. The background is usually the only backlight in this. This is the way Ben has shot this, to position people so that whatever's directly behind their head acts as the backlighting. I actually like this. Some people say the cinematography in the show feels too extreme, but to me, this makes it feel more realistic in a way that not everyone has perfect backlighting. Now, there's a scene here with the dad. I'm terrible with the names, so he's just gonna be dad, where they did have backlighting on it. I remember this standing out, but immediately when they cut around, there's no backlighting on him. Again, it's very extreme. Just one giant key source as our main lighting. I'd be interested to know what the crew had on set. I kind of feel like HBO's strategy is for you to just think about the story before people get too caught up in the technical. Like me, I actually had to find the camera gear list on a forum that someone said that they found one of the rental slips from it. So correct me if I'm wrong about the gear that was used on here, especially if you're one of the crew members. Hello, I was here with Nick Pilecki. He's a professional cinematographer, and we were recording some other videos, but we got talking White Lotus. And from your perspective, what has stood out for you, Nick, in that show?
The first thing I noticed was that the talent is not moving, or rarely ever moving. Like usually when you enter a scene, they're already like seated, planted. They're not moving around the scene, and I think that's because they're shooting with such shallow depth of field that they're almost telling the talent like you are locked in position for this scene. You also don't need to, your lighting setups don't need to be as elaborate because you know exactly where your talent's gonna be. It's not like they're doing the 30 feet of walking and you have to light that whole space. So strategically too, it can be a quicker setup, but it can also be kind of annoying for your directors if your director's like, and then we'll just get them to move over here, and the DP's like, oh, we're not lit for that at all.
Nick is an amazing cinematographer, works full time, travels the world to shoot amazing commercials and projects, and we've been working on something for quite some time now called Cinepath Pro. This is the path to becoming a full-time DP. So many of you out there are amazing at lighting. You know how to work cameras, you know how to get a beautiful image. But now, how do you do that full time? How do you increase the budgets you're working on? How do you collaborate with better directors working on better projects that more align with your taste?
Yeah, I love it. I would say the biggest thing with Cinepath is like, it takes people who are really good at lighting and composition, and instead of having to play the game of like, well, I produce, edit, and I take on small clients, it's like, how do I get a job where I am the visual curator and that is my sole focus?
Cinepath is gonna have over 50 videos in it. We're releasing it this May. That's the plan. It's part of the Art of Documentary with over 7,000 filmmakers in it worldwide. Get on our wait list so you can get your work reviewed live by Nick. Make sure to sign up below. We'll put that in the description. Let's get back to, well, I guess me getting back to White Lotus.
Let's do it.
Maybe some squirrels. You'll see in White Lotus, when you're indoors with people and the room is lit with tungsten lighting, people's faces are extremely warm, almost yellow. We're kind of getting into Simpsons territory. And I haven't found that distracting. Some people have complained that it feels oversaturated, but that's the look that they've gone for. They've wanted to show this luscious environment. And when we're at nighttime, the blues are blues. And when we're in a room where there's for some reason a red light, it is extremely red. And if we're gonna be outdoors and the skin tone is gonna be balanced, we're gonna have a giant green, extremely colorful, highly saturated background. You'll even see that the way they edit this, that there is high color contrast. You'll go from an extremely red scene to the next scene being extremely blue. There's intention with this so that we're not getting exhausted from the same color palettes. One of the things I find quite interesting with this show is that it kind of is breaking a lot of the traditional rules that you're taught. Saying that you need backlighting, saying that with a key you also need a fill, saying that shallow depth of field makes you look like an amateur filmmaker because all you're doing is blurring out the background. That is where I realize a lot of the principles or rules we say in filmmaking just don't always apply if you're using them with intention. I think that's the whole point whenever you hit record as a cinematographer, is thinking about what is my character feeling? What is happening before this scene and what is happening after this scene? But even when we are outside with the characters, there is a warm tone to the overall scene. Pale is not something that is part of the show. Now, when it comes to handheld versus locked off, I haven't seen a huge thread throughout the show, although many of the scenes with certain characters, like the brothers or the middle-aged women, tend to have more handheld, whereas there's certain other characters where it's all locked off for most of their scenes. I don't know if this was intentional or if it's just the decision with the energy that these people have. Perhaps even as I'm saying that, I'm realizing the younger people have the handheld shots where the older generation is more locked off. This could be me just digging too deep into the cinematography, and it's not something that I necessarily felt when watching the show, although the show is so disciplined in how that it shoots that when they do introduce handheld, it does give the scene a punch of energy that you wouldn't normally be feeling in the show because of the tight, locked off, super shallow feeling. Suddenly when you go to a wide angle where you're getting a lot more depth of field and it's handheld, it does say a lot more. Let me know what you think of this show. Would love to know your thoughts on the cinematography. Do you like the high color, shallow depth of field, no backlit, large, soft key lighting? This is the style of the show. Or would you rather go back to a Terrence Malick, New World, super deep focus, wide shots? I think there's a time and a place for all cinematography, and I appreciate when someone's trying something new. I don't love goodbyes, but I do love squirrels.
Squirrel!
Really, really appreciate them. Apparently they bury like 10,000 nuts a year.
Enjoy the fruits of your labor.
That's crazy. See you on the next one.